Hello, Marines and sailors of NOSC Greensboro. This is Chaplain Reece coming to you with this Good Friday time of reflection. This may be the first time some of us have met, as I just arrived at NOSC Greensboro in January. I look forward to seeing each of you when this season of quarantine is over. In the meantime, I'm lifting each of you and your families in prayer, and I invite you to contact me, leaving your contact information at the email address on the opening screen for prayer, counseling, or any other kind of support that I can offer. For our Marines and sailors in the Christian faith, this is a significant week that began on Palm Sunday and ends today with the crucifixion of Jesus. It is our tradition to reflect on the last words of Christ on Good Friday, which refers to the last 7 sayings of Jesus that he spoke on the cross. These are likely not the only words that Jesus spoke from the cross, but what we can know for sure is that these are the words that survived and were eventually written down a few decades after Jesus' death. So let us begin our Good Friday reflection with Jesus' first words from the cross. He said in Luke 23:34, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Jesus advocating for the forgiveness of those crucifying him is pretty remarkable. This challenges our notion that some folks are beyond forgiveness. But perhaps the greatest challenge is Jesus' affirmation that they don't know what they are doing, particularly since the crowds just urged the authorities to release a known bandit in Barabbas and send Jesus to his death. There is a great truth accompanying this thought. When we participate in any kind of sinful or immoral behavior, no matter what our gut tells us, we can never fully know the extent of our wrongdoing, or how many people are being affected, or how many generations will be scarred. And that's what makes sin, or missing the mark as Paul defines it, so daunting. That's why we must take up our cross and follow Jesus, because the implications of our sin are great. Not only that, but in these words, Jesus teaches us that the first step toward a better relationship, a stronger family, or a stronger world, is mustering up the courage to offer forgiveness, remembering that we have all made mistakes that carried far more consequences for us and others than we realized. On the cross, Jesus models the way of grace with this extravagant offer of forgiveness. Now for the second word from the cross. Also in the Gospel of Luke, Luke 23:43, Jesus says to a thief hanging on a cross next to him, "Today thou shalt be with me in paradise." Throughout this gospel, Jesus is concerned with those who are poor, who are judged, or who have made mistakes. Like the prodigal son, you may know that parable. There were 2 thieves hanging next to Jesus, one on each side, and most of the commentaries that I read say that a better translation than thief is insurrectionist. These 2 men have rebelled against the government, or they're participating have participated in some kind of uncivil revolt. We don't know everything about these men, but make no mistake about it, Jerusalem would not have wasted this kind of time and energy on a couple of simple thieves. But one of the criminals says to Jesus, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." The man's sincerity can be felt, I think, in his response. Consider how different his words are from the other criminal, who basically says, "Save me," or "Rescue me," only concerned about himself. But this one says, "Remember me." I think what he is saying is, Jesus, don't forget about me, but just remember that one time that I did what was right, and I acknowledged you, and I took up for you. Remember those things when you come into your kingdom. I think he's expressing that he knows that he took a wrong turn and that he doesn't deserve anything. I know that I deserve to die in my sin, perhaps, he thought, but just know that I fear you. We find 2 very different approaches to God in this narrative. The one who acknowledged that God doesn't really owe him anything. He's getting his just reward. For the wages of sin, the scriptures declare, is death. The other thief is going to die just like he lived, entitled, and refusing to acknowledge the error of his ways. We notice in the text that Jesus never even speaks to that man, probably because Jesus knows that he isn't listening anyway. To the sincere dissident, Jesus says today, "Thou shalt be with me in paradise." That wasn't what the man was asking for, but Jesus gave him more than what he asked for. He offered him paradise, certainly in the next life, but also the comfort and peace in his own soul. In this word from the cross, we learn that Jesus offers us second and third and fourth and fifth and unlimited chances to change our attitude and refocus our lives. Now, Jesus' third word from the cross was offered to his mother and friend, which John 19:26 calls the beloved disciple. Jesus' mother is next to him, suffering the loss of her son. The beloved disciple, Jesus' friend, is there. He's watching his best friend die. And Jesus says, "Woman, behold your son." And the beloved disciple, Jesus says, "Behold your mother." This setting speaks to the power, I think, of the ministry of presence. When words could not help Jesus, his mother and friend were both by his side. They were agents of comfort for Jesus. It was the kind of comfort and care that Jesus wanted his mother and friend to have when he was gone, or perhaps when they find themselves in a very similar situation. It may appear that Jesus is just making sure that his mother, likely a widow at this point, living in a man's world, would have had her physical needs met and taken care of. But more than that, Jesus is giving his mother a son to love and cherish, and to his likely motherless friend, Jesus is giving a mother. As Stanley Hauerwas writes, these words create a new family. Jesus tells Mary to regard the disciple he loved as her own true family. And this way she becomes for us the firstborn of a new reality, a new family that only God could create, Hauerwas writes. Jesus also uses the word behold here. And in the scriptures, when we see the word behold, it often refers to a new reality. So Jesus is saying, behold, a new family. On the fourth word, this fourth word from the cross, Jesus is inaugurating a new sisterhood or brotherhood or family of which we are all a part. And now for the fourth word, recorded in Matthew 27:46. Jesus, his agony on the cross is continuing, and he cries out to God, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" We've all heard that you shouldn't question God, but then we get to this passage, and Jesus is asking God a question. Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, has the audacity to question the heavenly parent. You know, it doesn't get any darker than this, does it? When there seems to be a disconnect between Jesus and the heavenly parent. When Jesus asks a bold and honest question, yet God is silent in responding. Undoubtedly, Jesus is experiencing mental, emotional, and social isolation. But he's also experiencing spiritual isolation. Jesus was fully human and fully divine. If Jesus couldn't feel spiritual isolation, then he wasn't fully human. It gives me a lot of hope knowing that Jesus has experienced spiritual isolation just like we do. It is a reminder that when God is silent in our lives, perhaps we don't have to be silent, but we can cry out to God and share with God exactly what is on our hearts. Some of the great spiritual partners in the faith have been able to recognize the darkness but not be afraid of it. Catholic nun, Mother Teresa, I once read, experienced a terrible darkness and emptiness in her life when she joined the destitute and the dying of Calcutta. And she only came to love the darkness after she took on a discipline of smiling into the emptiness, because she knew that even in the emptiness and the darkness, God was still there, working in ways beyond our ability to grasp. Crying out to God with the honest questions and pain of our existence doesn't mean that we are lacking in faith. It doesn't mean that we are questioning our mission. Jesus felt disconnected from God, but he knew that God was there. And we know that Jesus believed that because he prayed. He cried out to God, and he was honest with God. Not only that, but while Jesus' words reflect his human nature and pain, they also reflect his deep spiritual life. It's been said that there is a psalm for everything that we experience in life. These words from Jesus are actually a direct quote from the psalmist, from Psalm 22. My God, why hast thou forsaken me?" is a lament that is a part of a much larger psalm of praise and hope. It may begin with, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" but it erupts into a song of praise. "But you, Lord, do not be far from me," the psalmist writes. "You are my strength. Come quickly to help me, to deliver me from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dogs." He goes on to write, "All the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord." I encourage you to read all of Psalm 22 sometime today, as it reveals that while Jesus was experiencing isolation, he was not without hope. And now, for the fifth word from John 19:28, Jesus says, "I am thirsty." Crucifixion has taken a toll on him, and now he is nearing his final breath. Jesus refused to take the initial drink of vinegar that was mixed with myrrh because it would lessen his pain and his suffering. But now Jesus does take the vinegar from the jar, but just to moisten his lips so that he would be able to echo his final words. Jesus was referring, of course, to physical thirst when he said, I am thirsty, which prompted the drink of vinegar. But Jesus' yearning and his desire to press on in the face of suffering, along with his faithfulness to maintain his composure in life's most difficult hour, reveals the great thirst that he had for you and for me. I ask today, what are we thirsty for? Are we thirsty for power and notoriety and self-preservation? Those are the things that drove the crowds to crucify Jesus. But Jesus was thirsty for righteousness and moral courage. Jesus never lost his appetite and his thirst for loving others and forgiving others and building and creating new relationships with others. It was this mere sip of vinegar, moistening his lips, that enabled him to offer his sixth word from the cross. And it is in John 19:30. Jesus says, "It is finished." We ask, was this a cry of defeat or was this a proclamation of victory? Perhaps the best understanding of these words is that it has been accomplished. It's the expression an artist might offer after putting on the finishing touches. It's the sense of accomplishment that Michael Jordan probably felt when he hit that last elbow jumper against the Utah Jazz in his final game, but he wasn't finished. It's a Marine's expression after leaving the gym, or a sailor, but you know that you will be back. You see, Jesus isn't finished yet, but it is accomplished. The sinless life of Christ has been lived to its fullest. The power of God has been on full display. The kingdom of God has come near, and now there is nothing else that can be said or done because Jesus has said and done it all. The great tragedy of Good Friday is that after all Jesus said and all that Jesus did, he was rejected by his own, nailed to a cross, and left to die. But in the darkness of human disobedience, the incarnation of God shined. One poet writes that in a dark time, it is when the eyes begin to see. I remember the first time that I gave the evening prayer a couple years ago aboard the USS Gunston Hall. As you all know, the bridge is dark at night. There wasn't a star in the sky. I was pretty blind as my eyes adjusted until someone said, "Stand there for a minute, chaps, and just let your eyes adjust." And within a few minutes, I began to see shapes and figures, and the handful of ultra-low-lit navigation devices there lost their blur. I even saw some things that I hadn't noticed in the light. It was a whole new vantage point. The Gospel of John's invitation is that we would be able to see in the darkness. The Gospel writer doesn't open this Gospel with "the darkness ceased and the light emerged." Rather, John 1 opens with "the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." By the time we arrive at Jesus' final words, the seventh word in Luke 23:44, we're beginning to see who God is in the darkness of Golgotha. After all has been accomplished, Jesus prays again, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And the text says that having said this, he gave up the ghost or the spirit. Witnesses are very important in Luke's gospel. There are two sets of witnesses, one a Roman centurion and the other set of witnesses, the crowds who were cheering on Jesus' crucifixion. They don't acknowledge who Jesus is until he breathes his last. The Roman centurion said, "Surely this man was innocent." And this fickle crowd that followed Jesus and cheered on his execution after witnessing Jesus' character in the face of death and hearing the words, "It is finished," they went away beating their breasts. It was a sign of grief, of shame, and guilt. Jesus was dead. The Christ candle was blown out. But now the Christ candle was burning in their hearts. Luke also mentions one more set of witnesses, a third set, which he calls acquaintances. They're actually some very faithful followers of Jesus. You know, every story needs witnesses, and all these witnesses could do was stand in the distance and try to make sense of what was happening. All they could do was watch from a distance and, as many scholars have said, hold vigil or keep watch for Jesus. When Jesus takes his last breath on the cross today, on Good Friday, we join these witnesses with a blown-out Christ candle in one hand and so many questions in the other. There's a sobering truth that emerges on Good Friday, and it is this: there's nothing that any of us can do to change the past. There was nothing that they could do to change the past either, except run away, hold the vigil, beating their breasts, as the text says. The truth is, Marines and sailors, we can't change the past, but we can always learn something from the past, and we can always learn something from these last words of Jesus when he said, "Into your hands I commend my spirit." Jesus lived his life with a sense of mission, purpose, and vision. Our lives are not our own, and God has a plan for us to care for the world and fulfill our mission here. The only way for us to really take control of our lives is to surrender our lives into the hands of God, just as Jesus did in those final words on the cross. The 7 words from the cross teach us that only the crucified Jesus can forgive human sin and enable us to forgive ourselves when we don't know what we're doing, and to forgive others when maybe they don't know what they're doing either. Only the crucified Jesus can offer paradise to sinners when death knocks on our door. Only a crucified God can hold together human families, and it is the crucified Christ that weeps with and stands in solidarity with humankind, permitting us to cry out with him, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" when it seems that God is silent. And only the crucified Christ can say that it is finished, because he has overcome sin and lived a life of perfection and accomplished what he set out to accomplish on this earth. And only the crucified Christ can teach us how to live and how to die, how to surrender our will to the perfect care of God. Into thy hands I commend my spirit. Only the crucified Christ can say there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for his friends. Marines and sailors of NOSC Greensboro, you all understand sacrifice and endurance and persistence and dedication. Your training, your service, and your experiences embody all of these ideals. I trust that on this Good Friday, as you reflect on Jesus' character and courage on the cross in the face of adversity, that you will be inspired, encouraged, and motivated to draw closer to God. As you go back and read these words on your own today, may they deepen your commitment to others and the mission to which we have all been called. May God bless each of you and your families this Holy Week. Remember that social distancing doesn't mean social isolation. Stay close to those you love and those who love you. Call if you're in need of spiritual or pastoral care of any kind. Thank you for taking some time to reflect on this Good Friday on the last 7 words of Jesus Christ. Until I see you again, may your Easter celebrations be filled with joy, with peace, with hope, and newness. Amen.